Mr. President, China retaliated today by reducing the number of American films that can be shown there. What's your reaction to them now targeting cultural exports from the United States?
I think I've heard of worse things.
All right, it's time to weave out the lies so we can get to the facts. Well, it would seem as if China is completely crumbling in response to President Trump's tariffs, even going so far as begging to make a deal, I'd say. And so today, we're going to comprehensively break down where everything stands with all of these tariffs. So first, let's hear from President Trump's Director of Trade and Manufacturing Policy, Peter Navarro.
This is unfolding exactly like we thought it would in a dominant scenario. What's going on here is we start with the observation. I don't think you would disagree with me at all. The world cheats us. They've been cheating us for decades. They cheat us with tariffs, higher tariffs. But more importantly, they cheat us with the so-called non-tariff barriers. It's the VAT taxes, the dumping, the currency manipulation, the technical barriers that keep our autos out of Japan, the agricultural barriers that keep our pork out of Australia or Europe. They're doing that to the tune of $1.2 trillion of wealth a year that we transfer now abroad, and $18 trillion of wealth since we started running deficits. You know how much $18 trillion of America that could buy? So that's the problem we're grappling with. So we have a strategy here where the president says we're going to charge them what they charge us. And the analytical issue is it's easy to calculate the tariff differential, but the non-tariff barriers are so much higher. So that's what we set, knowing full well that a lot of countries would come right to us.
You know what? That is exactly what has happened. As things currently stand, in response to President Trump's tariffs, 130 countries have reached out to the Trump administration to negotiate new trade deals. And keep in mind, these are all countries that have been imposing their own lopsided trade tariffs against American products. And so now, for the first time ever, they're being held accountable by President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. But let's talk about China. Check this out. Yesterday afternoon, China made a public announcement calling for President Trump to, quote, completely cancel all of his tariffs. Now, in response, President Trump just ignored them. In fact, the White House made a statement saying that President Trump doesn't have any plans to speak to China right now. So pretty much China is just going to have to deal with the tariffs. And you know why? Because for decades now, they've been imposing their own aggressive tariffs against us. And beyond tariffs alone, they've also done everything they can to hollow out the American economy. Seriously, China has pretty much engaged in economic warfare against the United States for decades now, and everyone was just too incompetent or non-willing to do anything about it until President Trump stepped into the picture. In fact, I want you all to take a listen to what the president of the United Auto Workers had to say about all of this just a couple of days ago.
We do believe, and we know, when it comes to auto, when it comes to heavy truck and agricultural implement, we know that tariffs will influence these companies to do the right thing and reinvest in this country and reinvest in factories in this country. You know, it's interesting, Stellantis, as Trump was announcing the tariff, announced at the same moment that they were going to lay off 800 people. That didn't change as Trump was making an announcement. To me, it's just trying to bait people. At the end of the day, we believe that Stellantis and these companies will bring work back because of these tariffs. I mean, look what they've done without them. Let's talk about the realities of what, and this is the thing, I've been reading a lot of this lately. Going back, in 1992, I voted for Ross Perot. Mm-hmm. You know why I voted for Ross Perot? For one reason, because he was the only candidate that talked about how devastating NAFTA would be to American jobs and to our manufacturing base. And he talked about that giant sucking sound. I've read this book here in the last week, Save your job, save our country. Why NAFTA must be stopped now. You know what's interesting? Since then, Ross Perot's become a prophet. Since NAFTA was inception in 1993, we've lost 90,000 manufacturing facilities in this country. Millions of jobs. And these weren't, low-end jobs. These were jobs that paid decent wages.
Yeah, so pretty much everything he just said is absolutely true. As you all know, for decades now, the American economy has been getting ripped off. The American middle class has been absolutely gutted, and the worst part about the entire situation is that no one has actually done anything to stop all of this from happening. Well, that is until President Trump came along again. Now, speaking of which, take a look at what Stephen Miller had to say the other day about President Trump's plan to bring manufacturing back to the United States.
All I want to say is that America is in the best position under President Trump to dominate the economic future because of how we are unleashing deregulation, exploring and opening American energy, including trillions of dollars in clean coal, and how we are on the verge of passing a tax bill that will provide economic certainty and make America into the most desirable place on planet Earth. To shore jobs, invest, expand, hire, and grow. This is an economic strategy. Deal with China's abuses, deregulate, explode American energy production, create the most favorable tax system for American development on the face of the earth. That is the recipe for radical American success, Maria.
So, boom, there it is. President Trump's plan is to cut out all of the overly burdensome regulations that prevent people from just doing business, and to make American energy so affordable that America becomes the go-to place to do business. And as many of you know, that's how America used to be before all of these globalists sold out the country. But you know what? Reciprocal tariffs aren't the only way that President Trump is putting some pressure on China. Take a look at this.
President Trump said in his State of the Union address, China has too much influence over the Panama Canal and America's going to take it back. And that's exactly what I was charged to do, what we're continuing to do. Chinese influence cannot control our own backyard, especially a critical waterway, key terrain like the Panama Canal. You mentioned 40% of ships are U.S. ships. 75% are going to or from a port. So we were able to secure two historic agreements, one with the Panama Canal Authority, that our ships, our military vessels and auxiliary vessels will travel first and free through that Panama Canal. And then we also signed a memorandum of understanding with the defense secretary over there and the president that established a robust and growing U.S. presence, right? You need to secure that key terrain. So Fort Sherman will reopen jointly with the Panamanians, a jungle school, and we're going to have a larger U.S. presence at the invitation of Panama, working with them to keep the communist Chinese out. If we can't use that waterway in a key contingency, then China has an advantage. Other presidents have allowed us, we've been sort of asleep at the wheel. President Trump has said we need to be serious about our own backyard. That includes a place like the Panama Canal. And I want to thank President Molino, a pro-Trump, pro-America president of Panama, who's sticking his neck out against communists whose influence was real there, Maria. We could see it. You could feel it. The communist Chinese want to control politicians. They're building infrastructure projects. They want to surveil. They want to take that canal. President Trump says, not on our watch.
Bam. Now, as Pete Hegseth says, for a long time now, China has been pushing the envelope, seeing how much they can get away with. And because of our country's long list of incompetent leaders, or just treasonous politicians, China has been able to get away with a lot, which is why I can't state enough just how massive it is that finally someone is stepping up and putting China back in their place. Now that President Trump is back in office, this country's guiding principle really is America first. Not China first, not short-term profit first. Nope, America first. That is what all of this is about. Don't be afraid to subscribe to the channel. Like the video if you found it informative. Hell, even share it with your family and friends. And let's talk about it in the comments here on Facts Only.